Hello everyone. Today we're going to look at multiplying polynomials. So we need to remember the distributive property and how to multiply with exponents. So one of the first types of multiplying we're going to see is a monomial times a polynomial, and this is the distributive property. So I'm going to multiply 3x squared by 4x to the fourth, then multiply it by negative 7x cubed, then multiply it by 12. So 3 times 4 is 12, x squared times x to the fourth. Remember, we add the exponents, so we have x to the sixth. The second term, 3 times 7 is 21, x squared times x squared is x to the fourth. And then the last one, 3 times 12 is 36, and I have my x squared still. Another type is a binomial times a binomial. So we're going to use what's called the FOIL method here. So the F stands for the first. So we're going to multiply the first value in each binomial. So 4x times 6x is 24x squared. O stands for outer. So the two terms on the outside. So a negative 4xy. I stands for inner. So the two in the inside, which is 18x. And then L stands for last. So the last terms in each binomial, which is negative 3y. After I have those four terms, I'm then going to add them. Unfortunately here, none of them are like terms. I've got an x squared, I've got an xy, I've got an x, I've got a y. So none of them have the same variables raised to the same exponents. So my answer is just those four terms. So here's another binomial times a binomial. So the first is 3x times 3x, which is 9x squared. The outer is the 3x and the negative 2y. So I have negative 6xy. The I is the other 3x and negative 2y, so these guys, which is also negative 6y. And then the L is the last, which are the two negative 2y's, and that gives me 4y squared. When I add them together, I have two like terms, so I'll combine them. And I ran out of room. So I'll have the trinomial 9x squared minus 12xy plus 4y squared. Notice that this first one I could have also written as 3x minus 2y squared. So I have a binomial being squared. It's the same two factors. And if I have a binomial being squared, I'm always going to end up with a trinomial, so 3 terms. And that's something that's important to remember later on in your math career. Whenever I'm squaring a binomial, I always end up with 3 terms. So for D, this is another special type, and it's called the difference of squares, and we'll see why in a minute. But it's the same terms. I have a 2a and a 2a. I have a 3b and a 3b, except one is being subtracted and one is being added. So that's going to be the important distinction here. It's not a binomial being squared because the signs are different. So let's see how that changes it. My first is going to be 4a squared. My outside is going to be 6ab. My inside is negative 6ab. And my last is negative 9b squared. My two middle terms cancel each other out, and I'm left with my first and my last. And if you notice, this is the difference, right? There's subtraction of, sometimes you see the word 2, sometimes you don't, of 2 squares. Each of these terms are squares. So this is the difference of 2 squares, or the difference of squares. And again, that happens when my two binomials have the same terms, except the operation between them is different. And if you take further math classes, you're going to see this come up fairly often. So let's try another one. 3z plus 4w times 2z minus w. So this is just a binomial times a binomial. It doesn't have a special name. So we're going to go through it. Again, the first, 6z squared. Outer, negative 3zw. Inner, 8wz. And L, negative 4w squared. So the last being negative 4w squared. Our outer and inner are the same terms, they're like terms. Even though I have zw and then wz, remember multiplication's commutative, it does not matter the order. They just have to be the same variables raised to the same power. So they both have a z to the 1, they both have a w to the 1. So they are like terms and I can combine them. So I'll end up with 6z squared plus 5wz or zw. It doesn't matter the order, minus 4w squared. And I put zw here. Typically you do put it alphabetically, so really I should have put 5wz to be more in line with the way that we normally do it. But again, it doesn't really matter, it's the same thing. Okay, here's another monomial times a polynomial, so I'm just going to distribute. And hopefully we can see that 7x times 6x to the 4th will give us 42x to the 5th. Again, remember, if you don't see an exponent, it's a 1. So 1 plus 4 is 5. My second term, 7 times 2 is 14. 1 plus 2 for the exponent is 3. And then for the last term, 7 times 12 is 84. X times x is x squared. The last two that we're going to look at are not quite the same things. We had a monomial times a polynomial, then we had a binomial times a binomial. So we're going to do just a little bit introduction into higher order ones. So we have a trinomial times a binomial. So what we're going to do here is we're going to distribute the x squared, and then we're going to distribute the negative 4x. So if I distribute just the x squared, I end up with x to the 4th minus 2x cubed plus x squared. And then I distribute my negative 4x, don't forget the negative. So negative 4x times x squared is negative 4x cubed. Negative 4x times negative 2x is positive 8x squared. And then negative 4x times 1 is negative 4x. And again, here we're going to combine like terms. So I have x cubed, and I have x squared, and I can combine those guys. So if I do that, I end up with x to the 4th minus 6x cubed plus 9x squared minus 4x. And then the last one is not just a binomial times a binomial, but a binomial times a binomial times a binomial. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply these two guys together. I can only ever, in reality, multiply two things at once. So I'm going to take the first two and multiply them together. But again, order does not matter. I could take any two of them and multiply them through. Okay, so I'm going to FOIL these guys. And I'm going to get 6x squared minus x minus 2 after I've simplified. What you should really do here is pause it, do it out yourself, and make sure you get the same thing. Okay. So I'm going to assume that you've done that, and that you agree that it's 6x squared minus x minus 2. So now this is going to be very similar to what we did up here. I'm going to distribute my 2x, and I'm going to get 12x cubed minus 2x squared minus 4x. And now I'm going to distribute the 3. So I have an 18x squared minus 3x minus 6. And then I'm going to look at what like terms I have. So I have two different x squareds I can combine, and I have two different x's that I can combine. And when I do that, I get 12x cubed plus 16x squared minus 7x minus 6. Okay. So just a little introduction to it. We're going to mostly focus on a monomial times a polynomial and a binomial times a binomial. So don't worry too much about the higher order ones, but you should be able to recognize how to do them. Okay, so make sure you read the book, try out the problems, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.